About half our families, a third to half the families are new, so hopefully this will give you some background information that you may not already know. If you've been to previous conferences, you may have already heard my talk. About 2/3 of it is the same, because not a lot changes. So feel free to take a nap, wander around, whatever you want to do. But the real question is, what do I need to know, and what do I do now? So disclaimers, as Ken already outed me, I work for the United States Food and Drug Administration, so the opinions expressed in this presentation are mine and mine alone, and not those of the US FDA nor the US government. It's a discussion of medical findings. Don't take this as medical advice. There is no substitute for a good discussion between you and your provider, whoever that is, your pediatrician, your geneticist, or whoever, because every kid's medical situation is unique. I have no financial conflicts of interest, but I do have a 14-year-old with 1p36 syndrome who just joined me on the stage. So the reason I'm up here is because I have 14 years of day-to-day experience with kids with 1p36. Later in this conference, you're going to hear from a pediatric neurologist who talks about seizures. You're going to hear about a pediatric GI doctor who knows everything about pooping there is. You're going to hear from a behavioral psychologist who knows all about how to change your child's behavior problems. You're going to hear from 2 different geneticists. Most of them have much more specialized training than I do. I'm just the general guy. But none of them have a 1P'er, so I have a bit of an advantage over them in that I have a lot of day-to-day experience. So what do I hope to teach you today? Some basic 1p36 information, some information about the medical needs of your kids, to give you some ideas about ways you can help your kids, and to provide realism tempered by hope. I think a lot of this conference is about hope because despite all the challenges our kids face, it's an amazingly positive group. Okay, if your child was recently diagnosed, or maybe even if it's just your first conference, this is pretty overwhelming. It'll be okay. You can handle this. Pretty much everyone in this room has faced some pretty difficult situation, probably quite similar to yours, and you have just met 300 of your new best friends. So feel free to talk, share ideas, answer questions. You know, you have a shoulder to cry on when you need it. So I picked group conference pictures, right? Tomorrow at 4, we'll do this year's picture. So these are a couple of the very early conferences, and you see it started out as a very modest group of, 15 people, and now we have 300. So what is 1p36 deletion syndrome? Okay, so basic biology, back to high school biology for those of you like me where it may have been a while. So in each of our cells, we have 46 chromosomes. They're divided into 23 pairs. Geneticists are very practical people. They numbered them 1 to 22, and then there's the X's and the Y's that make you male or female. And they named them 1 to 22, starting with the biggest one, number 1. Not more challenging than that. And there it is, number 1. So if you stretch that out, there are light and dark bands on chromosomes when you look at them under the microscope, and they name those. So the short arm is P because, if we just made it simple, we just said the short arm is S and the long arm is L, but that was too simple. So we made the short arm P. I don't know why. So chromosome 1, short arm, that's P, and then band 3, subband 6, so that's the tiny end of the chromosome. Chromosome 1 is something like 249 million base pairs long. Most of our kids are missing 1, 2, 5 million. So percentage-wise, not a lot. But a really, really big, important piece. Even if it's not that big, it's important. Okay, so chromosomes are complicated. So let's talk about something that we all are familiar with, I90. Let's pretend that I90 is a chromosome. So we've taken chromosome 1, we flipped it on its side, and we've laid it parallel to I90. And then I'm just going to simplify I90 into 10 cities, stretching from Buffalo to Seattle. Okay? This is not more complicated than that. Think of cities as genes. Genes make things, cities make things, and they're all connected, in a line, starting at the East Coast, going to the West Coast. So 1p36 is somewhere Seattle-ish. So there are 2 kinds of deletions. There are terminal deletions that just means at the end of a chromosome. So if you get rid of Seattle and Spokane, or if you get rid of Seattle, Spokane, and Missoula, that's at the end of the chromosome. So that's a terminal deletion. Just means the end is not there. Then there's an interstitial deletion. That means in the middle. So you cut out something in the middle, and then you stick the 2 pieces together. So here we got rid of Billings, Rapid City, and Sioux Falls. We moved Missoula over to Chicago. And so we're missing 3 pieces, but it's not the end. It's an interstitial deletion. So again, two kinds. One where the end is missing, one in the middle. Some of our kids have one, some of our kids have the other. And if you look at these conferences, so it got a lot bigger. I think, I'm not sure which one this is. This might be Tennessee. Nope, sorry. The one on the bottom left is St. Paul. So 1p36 deletion means a piece of the small arm of chromosome 1 is missing. And as I said, it's not a huge piece percentage-wise, but it's an important piece. Every one of our kids, probably in this room, has a slightly different deletion, right? Some kids are missing 1 million base pairs, some 1.5 million, some 5 million. But it's all broken at a different point. And so that means in a sense, all of our kids are missing perhaps a different combination of genes, although they all kind of look alike. So what we're going to get to in this talk is that missing piece of DNA affects many, many things. All right. So we talked about terminal deletions or interstitial deletions. Everybody has a different deletion. They can vary in size and location. So this is just a picture from a recent publication. Every one of those lines, whether it's blue or goldish, is a different patient, a different person with 1p36 with a different deletion. So the blue ones are ones that are terminal or at the end. The gold ones are the ones that are interstitial or in the middle. So everybody looks a little bit different chromosome-wise. So you could say, well, is this one disease or two, right? Terminal deletion or interstitial deletion, or is it many? And the answer is it all depends. So is this a rabbit or a duck? Well, it kind of depends on how you look at it, right? If you look at it one way, it looks like a rabbit, and if you look at it another way, it looks like a duck. So it kind of depends on how you think of this, right? It's not so much that it's one disease or many diseases, but it really depends on how you want to think about it. So our kids tend to be a little bit different, and this study pointed out, take this with a grain of salt, because I don't know that it's terribly meaningful, but basically what they said is, oh, if you have a terminal deletion, those are the blue ones here, you're more likely to have a brain malformation, seizures, which is epilepsy, right, heart malformation, and if you have an interstitial deletion, you're more likely to have microcephaly, which means your head is small. But you can see that kids from both groups had both things. So I think what I would say about this is our kids are more similar than different, right? No matter what the deletion is, most patients have pretty similar issues, okay? They have similar facial features, they have intellectual disability, they have low muscle tone, they tend to have behavior issues. And there's a whole slew of other things which I'll touch on just a little bit that many kids have, but perhaps less than 70%. So we call it 1p36 deletion syndrome. A syndrome is just a set of symptoms or conditions that occur together. So if you want to say this is one disease, we call it a syndrome because the kids look alike. But if you really looked at their genes, everybody's a little bit different. You can kind of see as I go through the sequential pictures, the conferences keep growing in size. Ken has to get further and further back to get everybody in the picture. So look, we'd all like to know this. My child has this deletion. What does this mean? Will they have seizures? Will they develop heart problems? What other problems should we look at? But our level of understanding is more like, well, we don't really know. Or in some cases, your child is missing this gene. That means they're more likely to develop, say, heart problems. But a lot of times, we don't know how much more likely. And just because you're missing a gene doesn't mean you're going to have a problem associated with that because it's affected by different things, right? Whether you're male or female, what other genes you have, and other factors we probably don't yet fully understand, right? If you have tall parents, you're likely to be tall, but we can't really say how tall you're going to be. But just because you have tall parents also doesn't mean you're going to be tall. Sometimes tall people have average height kids. So it's very hard to predict these things. It's complicated. But I think to the extent that we know certain kids are at risk for certain problems, that's important to know because it helps you and your doctors know what to look out for, what to screen for, what to be concerned about. So this is Ohio. Melissa, for you. Woohoo! Melissa hosted that one. And you can see Ohio really kind of, a lot of people there. Ken had to stand like way, way back. So does this have another name? No. It's sometimes called monosomy 1p36. In doctor speak, that just means you have one copy of the gene instead of two. So whether you call it monosomy or deletion, it doesn't really matter. It kind of all means the same thing. But it doesn't have a special name, you know, like Angelman's or whatever. We don't have a name. How common is it? Depends on the article you read. Most people will say 1 to 5,000 to 1 in 10,000 live births. I think the article that I showed you where all the blue and gold figures were, that said 1 in 18,000 in France. Whatever, pick a number. We don't know the exact number, but it's certainly a rare disease. But among rare diseases, it is not very, very rare, right? There are diseases out there where there might be 20 people in the whole country that have that disease. You know, we have 70 families in one room. So, you know, if I thought about our Facebook page, we have several hundred families there. So there are a lot of people. If you take that 1 in 10,000 number, divide it by the US population, you'd come up with something like 30,000. That seems like a lot. But, you know, it's possible that there are, you know, 10,000 or more people in the United States with 1p36 syndrome. And if there are older adults out there, maybe they don't have a diagnosis because maybe when they were born and they had a genetic workup, this wasn't picked up. And the ability to pick this up has gotten better and better and better, particularly in, say, the last 15 years. So it's very possible there are people out there in their, say, 40s who never got a diagnosis who have 1p36. Now, maybe most of us would walk by them, you know, in the supermarket and say, huh, they have straight eyebrows and they kind of look like my kid. I wonder if that's what that person has. Most articles will say there are definitely more girls than boys. I think when looking around our conference kind of bears that out. Some articles will say 2 girls for every boy. I think that French article says about 1.3 girls for every boy. Whatever, but more girls than boys. Can it be fixed? No. You can't just put back 1 million missing pieces, you know, base pairs of DNA. Doesn't work that way. We are getting to the point where we can do gene therapy on some things, but those are diseases affected by one single gene. When you have somebody with 1p36 syndrome, deletion syndrome, you're talking about, you know, a few, a dozen, several dozen genes being deleted, not one gene. So we're not there. I don't think we're going to get there. We don't have that kind of technology, and it doesn't even appear to be on the horizon. Maybe that's not even possible. But it's not coming tomorrow at any rate. And I think there are, you know, that's a bummer. You can't fix it, but that doesn't mean there aren't things you can't do to help. Is this your fault? The answer is no. In most cases, about 90 to 95%, this just happens. But certain families may be at risk if they have abnormal chromosomes. This is called a balanced translocation. So in the example here, right, there's the blue and the orange. You're supposed to have 2 all blue chromosomes, 2 all orange chromosomes, but you can kind of see there's a chunk of orange stuck on the blue and a chunk of blue stuck on the orange. And that's fine, because as long as you have 2 copies of everything, you're fine. But if you give one of those 2 colored chromosomes, pass that on to your kid, then they're going to have too much of one thing and not enough of the other thing. So that can happen. So I'd say it is important to have your chromosomes looked at if you have a 1p36 child and you're thinking about having other children, or if you're the typical sibling of a 1p36er, are thinking about having children and don't know if your parents have normal chromosomes. So certainly worth thinking about. So what does this mean for my child and my family? I think we all know kids with 1p36 have many, many, many issues. I mentioned the similar facial features, the intellectual disability, the low muscle tone, but many other problems. And especially, I think, the more I come to these conferences, I see what a challenge it is for almost all families in terms of behavior. So I think that's a really big, important thing. Not every kid has every feature of the syndrome or every issue. Children with similar deletions may have different issues. And we can't, again, really look at your chromosome and say, that's exactly the kind of problems you're going to have. We're just not there. So Ken, I think this might be Florida. Yeah, that's Orlando. So there, Ken had to climb up on a building or take a picture from a balcony there to get that one in. All right, so common features. We sort of talked about these straight eyebrows, and this is from that same paper with the blue and the gold chromosomes, the deletions I showed you. You see the kind of straight eyebrows, deep set eyes, this sort of flat bridge of the nose, triangular shaped face. So all kids with 1P look somewhat like each other. But the other thing I want to point out is that as the kids age, those features stay the same. So you can look at a kid that might be 3, and you can see the straight eyebrows and the deep set eyes, and 5.5 or 6, and as they get older, they still just look the same. The hairstyle changes, but the eyebrows don't, the eyes, the chin, still the same. And I'd also like to point out, it's not in any of the literature, but bushy hair is like something that goes with this syndrome. Their hair grows fast, it's thick, and while that's not like something that's put in a genetics textbook generally, yeah, it's true. Right, yeah, this was right before the sprinklers went off in San Diego. Yeah, we're all having fun in the park, posing for the picture, and then like 7 p.m. they turn on all the sprinklers. All right, other common features. We sort of mentioned tone, intellectual disability. So heart defects, seizures, hearing and vision, cardiomyopathy, which is the heart pumping, the heart squeezing as a pump, skeletal defects, genitourinary issues, things like missing a kidney or frequent urinary tract infections. We already talked about behavior. Sleep, which is kind of part of behavior. A lot of these kids don't sleep well. Speech issues and development. I'm going to touch on each of these things a little bit, and I think the theme here is more there's a lot we don't know rather than there's a whole lot we know. So intellectual disability. I think all children with 1p36 deletion have some degree of intellectual disability, but it does vary greatly from kid to kid. We can't predict the severity of that disability. But I would say that nearly all people with 1p36 require some support, some special educational assistance, and even 1p36 adults generally are not able to live completely independently. So if you have a young kid, certainly something to think about of, yes, we want to maximize their potential, but keep in mind their chance of being able to live wholly independently is pretty small. The French paper reports 1 person. I'd need to know more about that. They don't say any more about it in the paper. So low muscle tone affects about 95% of people with 1p36. And I'm going to say kids. I'm completely aware we have some adults here. I'm a pediatrician, so I think of the world as people under 18. But, obviously they hit their 18th birthday. They get older. There's Callie waving at me. So when I say kids, I'm just thinking of, being a parent generally. Feeding issues, really tough, especially in infancy. It is hard to suck and to swallow if you have very low muscle tone. This also contributes to difficulty with things like walking or crawling or other physical skills and fine motor skills like picking up something small like a finger food, right? Self-feeding with something like goldfish. You can't change tone. Tone is the amount of tension in muscles at rest. But that's very different than strength, which is the amount of force your body can generate when it's sort of maximally exerting itself, right? So many of our kids might have very low tone. They're very floppy at rest, but they can be quite strong. They can exert a lot of force when they want to. Wendy's 107 pounds. When Wendy goes running and hits into you, you will be knocked over. You will feel it. She has a lot of force behind her. I think therapy, and I'm going to say this like 5 times in this presentation, there is no substitute for good therapy. Physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, whatever it is. And I just honestly think that the more you can get your 1p36er out there to live life, whatever that is, to move around, to use their skills, that helps them develop new skills. All right, heart defects. When you see percentages in these slides, I've just, from the articles I've read, I've taken kind of like the high and the low and given you the range. And the problem here is that there aren't great studies. Most of the studies are around 60 kids. So you put 60 people in a room and you kind of say, raise your hand if you've had that. Raise your hand if you've had this. And they count them and say, okay, half the people in the room had a heart defect, that's 50%. But you can imagine if we did that at last year's conference, at this year's conference, and at next year's conference, the answer to the same question would be a little bit different because there's different people at every conference, right? Just like if we measured the height of everyone at one table, well, maybe the average height here is 5'7", the average height over here is 5'9". Well, what's the average height of a person? I don't know, right? You'd have to measure hundreds of people to come up with that number. You can't just take a small sample and say, well, what's the right answer there? So heart defects, let's say in about half, right? 43 to 75%. Most common are atrial septal defect or ventricular septal defect, ASDs and VSDs. These are little holes between the right and left side of the heart. They may or may not require surgery. But look, I think getting an echocardiogram to evaluate for structural heart defects is important, right? That means the heart, how it's built together. Are the chambers in the right place? Do they flow together in the right order? And if you have an issue, then obviously you should be followed by a cardiologist. But that's really important because some of these things are not necessarily obvious in infancy, and you might want to, just follow that up over time. Seizures, another big problem for our kids. Again, present in, let's say, half or a little more than half. Onset is often between birth and 2 years, but we've certainly had people with 1p36 who've not had a first seizure till they were teenagers. So I don't think we can ever say, oh, if you make it to this age and you haven't had a seizure, you'll never have seizures. You can't really say that. But I think, most kids who have seizures do it in fairly early in life, first couple of years. Most kids who have seizures can obtain good seizure control with the right combination of medications, but about 1 in 3 of those kids who have seizures can't get there. And that's hard, and it's problematic. But as new seizure medications come out, it gives neurologists, opportunities to try different combinations. We're having better and better success, but some kids do have very difficult to control seizures. So I would say, an EEG in infancy, and if someone has an episode that appears to be a first-time seizure, that's the test to get. One seizure is not necessarily a brief seizure, a big deal, but uncontrolled seizures or prolonged seizures are generally bad for development. So again, detection and treatment is important because we can get good control of seizures in most kids. Hearing and vision issues are a little less common, but are important. Hearing is super important for developing speech. So if you have a hearing loss that can be corrected with a hearing aid, that's a really important thing to pick up as early as possible, and to get hearing aids. You just can't develop good speech without good hearing, and clearly developing speech for many of our kids is a huge challenge. So to the extent that you can improve things that make speech difficult, like poor hearing, it's important. Vision or eye problems, same kind of thing, probably in up to half. If you look around, you see a fair amount of kids wearing glasses. Many vision problems are treatable with glasses or medication, so those are things that are good to pick up, right? And it's hard to interact with your world if you have poor vision. I feel pretty confident in saying that. I can see about 3 inches from my nose without my glasses, so I feel like I can speak from experience on that one. Cardiomyopathy. This is the problem with the heart as a pump. It doesn't squeeze the way it should. It doesn't pump blood the way it should. Probably happens in somewhere around a third. This can happen kind of at any time. Can happen in infancy, can happen in adulthood. And unless it's severe, there probably are not a lot of outward signs. Kids are not going to appear to have poor activity. They're not going to be blue. And it is treatable with medications. So again, cardiology evaluation in infancy and an echocardiogram every couple of years is probably reasonable, but obviously listen to the recommendation of your cardiologist, because I don't think this is by any means written in stone, because we really need more studies to sort of understand who is affected, what are the best treatments, does everybody's heart problems look similar or different. So skeletal defects, primarily here I'm talking about scoliosis, found in about 4 out of 10 kids. You can have things like a delayed bone age. You could have things like missing your 12th rib, which is completely unimportant, but, happens. But that's sort of one of those things that's interesting about your kid, but probably not medically significant in any way. But scoliosis, which is curvature of the spine, is really important. Over time, it can interfere with your heart function, with your ability to breathe well, and particularly for kids who are confined to wheelchairs, who are not ambulatory, who have low tone. This is a big risk for them, can often lead to them needing surgery, so definitely something to monitor. So a little less common general urinary abnormalities like kidney defects. Kidney defects can lead to frequent urinary tract infections. That over time can damage your kidney function. So something like a renal ultrasound and looking at kidney function is important to do if your kids had issues. Behavior issues. Mentioned this earlier. Behavior issues are really, really tough. And I think more than some of the other medical things can really seriously impair quality of life. The articles that I've read said 37 to 70%. I think that number's really closer to 100% if you carefully ask people about behavior issues. And the more common things here are things like self-injury, right? Biting of hands and wrists, tantruming, stereotypies, which are repeated purposeless movement, like hand flapping. You see things like head banging, and certainly excessive eating, and I think that might be greater than 13 to 20%, but some of our kids really, really, really struggle with not being obsessed with food, not eating like frequently. My daughter thinks that she is hungry all the time, wants to eat all the time. Like, she'll easily eat a 5-course breakfast. Other behavior issues, obsessive issues, slamming doors, turning lights on and off, obsessively talking about certain people, and I kind of mentioned eating. I think these are actually pretty common, and if my experience is typical, they change over time, and what my daughter is obsessed with, this year might be very different than what she's obsessed with next year, but she does get like hyper-focused on things and show me the same 30-second video over and over and over again, literally hundreds of times. When these things are problematic, they can be treated with therapy or by changing the environment. She used to like to slam doors. I took off her bedroom door. Now, there are other doors in my house. She doesn't slam those. It was only her bedroom door. I took it away. It's not a problem. She didn't slam a different door. Sometimes you can get lucky and just change the environment. And look, Dr. Isla Domostrop will be here to talk with everyone this conference, but bottom line, ignoring problematic behavior tends to decrease the frequency. Giving it attention tends to increase the frequency at which it will happen. Your kid says something or does something and you laugh, they tend to do it more because you've given it attention. But you can't ignore behavior that is potentially dangerous or that's just disruptive to your family. Sleep issues, also very common. Things like difficulty getting to sleep, frequent waking at night. Sleep disturbance can be caused by nighttime seizures, so that's something to think about. Typical solid advice is a daily routine with regular bedtime may help, but even with that, many of our kids will have challenges. People do use medications in some case. I think it's a case-by-case basis. To me, the most important thing is if you have a kid that gets up at night, make sure they're safe, right? Like, all my doors are dead-bolted because Wendy would just leave the house and go wherever. So you want to make sure they're in a safe environment. I think there are lots and lots and lots of behavior questions, and we don't know very much. We know that behavior and sleep issues are really common. We know they're a big problem in terms of quality of life. But there isn't a good article out there that describes which of these things are most common, how common, when do they occur. But I think the impact of behavior is really enormous and something that needs to be studied. That's the Baltimore conference. Speech and communication, another really important area, and clearly an area in which a lot of our kids really have trouble. Most patients with 1P36 have better understanding, better receptive language skills than expressive skills. Speaking is really tough for a lot of them. So this is clearly one of the more challenging areas. About 50% of kids are nonverbal, but Ashley Brazil's article found that about a third of those over 12 years use greater than 100 words. So when you talk to Callie, you will see that some 1P36ers can really excel in this area. The potential is there, but many, many kids have difficulty. That being said, I think most kids are really good at expressing their needs, and that just may not be through spoken communication, right? Pointing, gestures, signing, use of alternative communications like an iPad is just easier for some kids. And I think the ability to communicate is really important. I think how you communicate is not so important. I mean, if you can sign, if you can speak, if you can use Proloquo on your iPad, whatever works. But for them to be able to express what they want and need is really important. I think speech therapy, other methods of therapy, really important. But again, giving them some way to communicate is the key. Development really varies widely from child to child, and I don't think we can say that there is any normal or typical picture for 1P36, right? I mean, you're just going to see kids all over the map here, from kids that have very few developmental skills to kids that are doing very, very well. We have no good way of knowing which kid is going to be which in infancy. So the key there is get them involved in therapy, get them involved in activities designed to help them with new skills, and the earlier you can get them into therapy, the better. Again, I don't think there's any expected, but if you want some numbers, about 80% in one study walked with a range of 6 months to 8 years. I personally can't think of anyone who's walked before a year, but I'm just telling you what the article says. About 44% with first words, but some of those not using spoken communication until early adolescence, 12. About half achieving some degree of toilet training, and again, sort of all over the map in terms of age. Here's Florida. No, Houston, sorry. I saw the NASA logo. Made me think of the Cape. Houston, sorry. All right, medical care. Will your doctor have heard of this? Probably not, especially if they're old. Because, you know, this syndrome was not even described until the 90s. And, you know, as a pediatrician, you could see lots and lots of kids over a lifetime, and you might see one kid with 1P36, or maybe you just wouldn't ever see any. But there are really easy available resources, right? We live in the age of Google. So you can go to the 1P36 DSA site. That's great. You can go to Unique, which is rarechromo.org. There are other references at the end of my presentation. So there are certainly ways out there to easily get information for you or your doctor. My thoughts on medical care. You need a really good doctor. I don't think it matters if they're a pediatrician, a family doctor, a geneticist. I don't think their training matters as much as someone who is capable of coordinating specialists, taking the time and willing to put in the work. Our kids are work. The way you survive as a physician in this day and age is through volume and seeing lots of patients. So the easiest way to do that is to see the simplest, least complicated medical patients. So you need someone who's willing to throw that out the window and take the time to see your kid and take the time to get the history of all the problems they have, all the specialists they're involved with, and help you with that. That's not easy to find in this day and age. We touched on some of these earlier about specialists or tests that might be needed, close monitoring of growth, cardiology, EEG to look for seizures, thyroid test. I think it's always good to see a geneticist. Sometimes they're the people who coordinate the care. Sometimes they're just the person you see once a year. Hearing and vision, potentially feeding and swallow evaluations for those kids that have a lot of trouble with that. Educational evaluation and school placement issues. Every kid's going to have school issues. The more you can, get involved with the school, the earlier you get involved, and the more you can be a thorn in their side because they are not there to help you, right? The school system is there to get kids through and to not spend money on kids who need it. That's what the school system is there for. They're not there to be your friend. You're going to have to push them to get services. If you don't have to in your district, great, but generally you're going to have to. So, be difficult when you need to be. And obviously, anything else your doctor suspects or thinks needs to be investigated, I follow up on that. Things you can do. Already touched on it a little bit. Therapy, therapy, therapy. Earlier is better, more is better. But again, if you're just holding your kid's hand and helping him walk out here, or helping him with his reverse walker move around, that's helping them, right? That's building muscle. It's building coordination. Anything you can do to get kids out there, get them involved in things, expose them to new experiences, I think is a good thing. Be an advocate for their medical care and their education. As I said, you're going to have to be a thorn in the school system side. But, we have to advocate for these kids. They can't advocate for themselves or for 1P adults. Keeping records of all your visits and test results is really, really helpful. We think that electronic medical records are great, except the problem is that the electronic medical record at Hospital A doesn't talk to Hospital B, who doesn't talk to your primary care doctor. So if they're all within the same hospital, that's great, it'll work. But otherwise, it's not going to, and it's on you to sort of keep track of these things. So a few tips for productive visits. Write a list of questions. Write the important ones first so that you can get your questions answered. That's really key. I'd say the other thing is to be organized. And whether you do this in paper or you do this on your phone, however you want to organize it, things like height, weight, and that sort of info, name and contact information for all the specialists, the date of the last visit with each specialist and what you discussed, tests and test results, medications with dosages and frequency. It's really hard to remember that kind of stuff, so just having it written down is great. And a list of current issues. So I think the conferences just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So research is key here, because if you want better numbers about these things, if you want better information, if you want me to come up here and say more than, well, we only kind of know, I think research is really important. So what can I say? Participate in studies, because we can't learn stuff without actually having a large enough group of patients. Promoting awareness, which is in part what this is doing, right? Deletion, support, and awareness. The more people are aware, it helps raise money, it helps spark interest. I'll put in a plug. When Jenny and I are sitting at the merch table tomorrow and selling stuff, that's not because Jenny and I are profiting. All that money goes right back to 1P36. So when we make a little money selling stuff, it goes into supporting this conference and other activities for the DSA. And obviously fundraising. I always put this line in, but research is expensive. So if you have a way to help us out with that, because you're wealthy, you're famous, you're politically influential, your uncle's a senator, CCAN, because we'll take advantage of that situation. That's how really rare diseases gain more prominence, is by having some celebrity with that disease or having somebody that's politically influential by that disease. So part two, how can we promote research? Part of it is we can do some of this ourselves with some professional help and support. So we have a registry, right, which is a study that follows people over time and sees how symptoms develop and how things change. So a typical study, as I mentioned earlier, just looks at people at one point in time, right? We say, how many people have had whatever, raise your hand. They count them and they say, okay, 33 out of 100 people had this. That's useful, but it's not real useful, right? Because it's nice to know how many people had seizures, but you'd really like to know what type of seizure and when and how often and what medication treated that. And studies generally don't look at that. So what registries do is start with a group of patients, in this case, people with 1P36 deletion, and they follow them over time. Every year you would answer the same questions on a questionnaire. Over time, this builds a lot of information about what issues occur at what age, how they affect a child's life. People can join at any time, and you would simply fill out a questionnaire once a year. And again, this would improve the quality of care for our kids, because it would improve the amount of information we have. It would help families understand their situation and certainly assist in decision making. Also, if there are people interested in doing research in 1P36, and we have people enrolled in a registry, if 1P36 gives permission, those people, and you give your permission, those people can reach out to you for participation in a study. So we have a study run by a group called Coordination of Rare Diseases at Stanford. They're a nonprofit research institution. We actually have 85 people enrolled in our registry. You can go to this link and complete the enrollment form. They will send you a questionnaire. Obviously, they're asking you for sensitive medical information. So right now, you can't do that online because they're upgrading their cybersecurity. So that's a little bit frustrating. But they'll either send you a paper form or they'll send it to you in terms of a questionnaire that you can fill out. They'll send it to you via email, and you can return it to them, but you can't just do it directly online right now. They're hoping to have that up and running by September. They will not share your personal information with outside researchers unless you give permission. 1P36 DSA also has to give permission to use that data. You can also remove your data at any time, and this doesn't cost 1P36 anything. It doesn't cost you anything. They are funded by donors, so it's free to us. So a couple of resources. The DSA website's pretty good. Your doctor has questions, you have questions, go to the 1P36 DSA website first. Unique has a pretty informative guide on 1P36. It's from 2013, but it's still pretty good, and the link is there. And if you want a list of issues that require follow-up, there isn't really one for 1P36 deletion, but there is one for people who are missing the gene called RERE, which many of our kids are missing. And there's the link to it. And it may not be the end-all be-all, but it's a good starting point. Here's last year. We filled the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And you can see that Ken had to be all the way across the entire museum to take the picture, and it just had a ton of people there, and it was great. All right, I want to finish up on a lighter note, which is 8 things I've learned from Wendy. Laugh with me, even if you don't know what's funny. Wendy will just sit there and belly laugh at, I don't even know what she's laughing at, because she's watching the same Cat in the Hat video that she's already watched 6 times that day, but this time it's funny. I don't know. But you just have to laugh with her. And this is written from Wendy's first-person perspective, because I'd like to think this is what she thinks. Don't decide what I can and can't do. Let me try and try again. It may take a while, but most times I will succeed. And if I do fail this time, so what? I am not physically or emotionally made of glass. In fact, I think most of our kids are physically far tougher than we are. Failure is a part of everyone's life. We all fail sometimes. I am probably more resilient than you are. I want to see and do things like every other kid. It's okay if I fall, eat a handful of dirt, etc. Help me get out there and try. Developmental delay does not mean you are innocent. Okay? My daughter schemes. She will wait till you look the other way and go running in the opposite direction. She will do mischievous things. She will take things from her sister that her sister does not want her to take. Do not assume just because someone has some intellectual disability that they are not mischievous. I understand more than you think I do. I will do things you never thought I would do. I am always watching and listening. Don't give up on me. And since I am always watching and listening, you should not leave any doors unlocked, or slack off on your childproofing, or leave sharp objects laying about. I will pounce on your mistakes like a ninja. And lastly, sometimes your child is going to drink from the dog bowl. Pick her up, dry her face, move on. It is not the end of the world. No one dies from drinking from the dog bowl. Just, we all have bigger problems than this. Don't sweat it. I thank you for your time and attention, and we can take some questions, I think.